wonderful essay in there about a dream he had when he was preaching, and he got off his text a little bit and had this brilliant idea, and wanted to follow it. And he, was in the pulpit. And he looked underneath and everything, and he couldn't find a Bible. And so the whole essay was about how you can find prayer books in the Episcopal Church, but you rarely find a Bible. And now in this day and age,
yeah, in this chapel you can find Bibles, but you can't find a hymn or a prayer book.
well, I was going to say, in this day and age, when the services are always printed out in their entirety in the service leaflet, you can't even find a prayer book. So I brought them both just in case we needed them. I am Jim Miner, and this is my wife Betsy. A word first about Betsy, who is a good soul. I've been ordained 55 years. And so Betsy has been to more annual parish meetings, parish potlucks, adult classes, nursery sessions, and all that sort of stuff, than you can imagine. And when we moved here from Ohio 2 years ago, we sold a car, thinking living at Windcrest, we wouldn't need 2 cars. So poor Betsy is going to sit through one more adult class. Because, either that or she get out on C-470 and from her way across. I am a priest. I've spent my entire active ministry in the Diocese of Ohio and the Diocese of Southern Ohio. We moved out here 3 years ago now, to be with children and grandchildren. I wisely learned after my son got this very sort of sad and forlorn look. We used to say we came out here because of the grandkids, and it became apparent that he thought he was just chopped liver. And so I now am careful to say children and grandchildren. Well, thank you for coming. When Gary asked me to think about a Lenten class, I immediately began to drift toward the kinds of things that I was most interested in, poetry and short stories and that sort of thing. And I suggested poetry, and he enthusiastically said, "That's great." And then I woke up one night and said, "Poetry. Who is going to come to poetry?" Andy, I'm glad you're here. I passed Andy in the parking lot last week, and he said, "I understand you're going to teach a class on poetry for Lent." And I said, "Is that wild enthusiasm I hear?" And he said, "Not really." We were in neighboring parishes in Columbus, so I was counting on that long-term acquaintance and friendship to bring you back.
Can I just break in? Mark and Mike, can you hear okay? Good, thank you.
Well, here's what I have in mind. I do not intend to be a presenter. I intend for you all to do homework during the week. The plan is that I have selected 6 to 8 poems for each week in Lent, and they are loosely related to the themes of the readings for the upcoming Sunday. And my hope would be, other than this first Sunday when you didn't really have a chance to do so, my hope would be that you all would spend time with those poems during the course of the week, and perhaps read them more than once, but a number of times, and just sort of quietly let them speak to you. And during the course of the week, perhaps find one that strikes you particularly. And then come prepared and willing to share that poem with the rest of us, so that we can respond and enjoy the poem together. In reading poetry, I don't, I cringe when people ask, what does it mean? Because poetry to me is more like listening to a piece of music than it is reading an essay. Some poems are narratives, so there's a story. Some are just totally lyrical. They sort of try to capture a moment of feeling or experience. So it may be the story of the poem that intrigues you. It may be the feeling that the poem elicits in you. It may be, may just be the sound. You know, I encourage you to read the poems out loud. There are a couple times I close we don't have a very large apartment. So privacy is I go into the bathroom is what I do. And I read these things, some of them. And I use the bathroom for a lot, actually. It's a great carving studio. I'm a wood carver, and your chips go all over, and you can just sweep them up on that nice tile floor and leave it all nice and clean and tidy. So it's a multi-purpose room. When I want to read out loud, I'll go in there, partly because I don't want to bother Betsy, but partly because I don't want to embarrass myself. And it's sort of like praying in the closet. I think we read a lesson about that on Ash Wednesday, don't we? And so maybe it's the sound of the poem. Maybe there's just a single word that strikes you, and maybe it's that it makes no sense at all. Whatever it is that sort of captures you, bring that and offer just to perhaps read the poem with us, and then say, you know, I don't get it at all, or I really love this one line. Boy, that, and I find, this is my own experience, that so often a poem will give expression to something that I've known all along, but I never put words on. And the poem does it, and I like to share that, and other people respond and may have a similar experience or not at all. So that's what I hope we'll do together. And I began our little booklet here with a quote from Mother Mary Clare, whom I know nothing about, except that she's died recently, an English nun. The other problem is I'm past my 80th birthday, and so some of these, the order in which she was a nun has escaped me. But I'll remember at 3 in the morning, and I have your phone number. But I included this little essay, or this little paragraph of hers at the head of our first booklet here about prayer, because I think it's absolutely true of my experience of prayer, but also I think suggestive of how we read poetry. Reading poetry for me is not so much trying to understand it or trying to get the meaning of it, but simply to listen. Mother Mary Clare, and also this first poem by Mary Oliver, suggests that that prayer is a sort of a point of entry into a silence where, well, actually a number of these poems, into a silence where we can hear another voice speaking to us. And that seemed an appropriate place to begin, since the narrative of Ash Wednesday is Jesus going into the wilderness. And the wilderness is a strange, wild place where voices begin to be heard. Revelations occur there. You have visions there, and it's a bit scary. As Mother Mary Claire says, it's both it's difficult and it's decisive because at the bottom of the first paragraph, and it's decisive because it is the beginning of our entry into a personal relationship with God, in which we gradually learn to let go of ourselves and let the Word of God speak within us. And then the next paragraph is absolutely terrifying, because when you allow that to happen, it can be very frightening. And the metaphor she uses for that is it may be as devastating as the result of Our Lady's yes, which was a sword piercing her heart. So I think reading poetry is delightful and fun, and could be a bit dangerous in that it could lead us to confront or listen or hear things we might not otherwise have heard. So with that jolly entry, let's, some of you may have picked up, Gary was good enough to print this last week and have it available. Have any of you read through some of these poems, and is there anything like the poem you'd like to offer for us to read together and share? We're friends.
But they're also Episcopalians.
Just imagine this is the bathroom and the door's closed. It's private. It's okay.
Well, I'll speak up.
And
Jenna under the bus.
it would help me if you could, Kathy, thank you.
We both liked the first poem, right? And I haven't asked her why she liked it. I liked the reference to an ordinary world around us, not quite the wilderness that sounds so scary and is the source of these visions and revelations and things that you, voices that you hear, but more just the listening and waiting part of it, because that's what spoke to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, what spoke to me in that poem is we can find beauty everywhere. She refers to weeds in a vacant lot. There is beauty in everything and in every person. Sometimes it's hard to find, but I think if you just keep the silence within yourself and think about the person or the environment that you find yourself in, you can find that peace.
And then that line about a doorway into thanks. So often my prayers turn into petitions, and I'm asking for something. And I think just to send up a thanks with no strings attached is a nice idea.
Yeah, thank you. Did others read the poem, that poem Praying by Mary Oliver, and respond to it?
I did.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Amy, go ahead.
I like even the cadence of it, or just, just the blue iris, the weeds, small stuff. I just the way sort of, the cadence or the way it then spoke to me. And then I like the fact about it being not a contest, you know, you don't have to pray perfectly.
Isn't that nifty?
It's just-
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a doorway and then open it and be silent.
I'm a cradle Episcopalian, but for several years, when I was preschool and kindergarten, my parents lived in a town that didn't have an Episcopal church. So I went to a Presbyterian Sunday school, and there, all prayer had to be in King James English. You know, you couldn't just blurt out words, you know, it was a contest, I gotta tell you. Not only that, they told us when we prayed, we had to close our eyes, so all us kids went like this. Our eyelids closed.
Well, this just immediately struck me because I've been a bird watcher for 40 years. And bird watchers really love exotic birds. Right? And so we look at starlings, or we look at pigeons, you know, they're trash birds. They've been, you know, introduced and all of this. They're gorgeous. You know, they're absolutely beautiful. Both starlings and rock doves, rock pigeons, and common pigeon are beautiful. Robins are amazing, but we see them all the time, so we forget because we're really focused. We get really focused on these exotic birds, right? And so I was just, you know, it doesn't have to be a blue iris; it could be weeds, and that sort of summons to pay attention to the stuff that's just really common, and what's there and how can it speak. Was that really attracted me to this poem.
Well, I was really attracted to the last line that says, and silence in which another voice will speak. And I've done a lot of big lives and stuff like that. And I can remember my first one when I had to pray for people. My only thought was, God, you put me in this position, you better give me the words. and he did. I mean, literally, God spoke to me and gave me the words to pray for people.
Thank you. I obviously like all these poems, or they wouldn't have ended up on these pages. And I must say, I did worry a little bit about the fact that the editorial power I was taking, I was mindful of that because I was mindful of it because there were probably, you know, 3 times as many other poems that would have been relevant and good. And so you're just getting my slant. And then again, I worried, oh my gosh, this is self-revelatory. You're going to know where I am completely because, oh, so that's what turns this guy on. The Mary Oliver poem just, and I guess all poems, but this one particularly, it's amazing if you spend time with it. You know, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 lines. And almost the whole world is in there. I mean, I'm in awe when you read this poem, and here's this little woman who did live out in Provincetown, wintering through those bitter winters and watching the gulls sail. I read a lot of Mary Oliver. And she packs so much into 10 lines, and the lines are not that long. They're just, you know, so suggestive and so full of potential for us just to pull out. Someone said, I so often begin to pray in petition, but then end up in thanksgiving.
Well, I would hope to change the balance of that, yes. I don't think I always end up in Thanksgiving, but occasionally I give myself a little kick and say, stop asking, just say thanks.
That I think is a perfect segue to the Emily Dickinson poem. Emily, if you're not familiar with, well, I was going to say recent Emily Dickinson scholarship, but it's really from the 1970s on. There were 2 major editors. Thomas Johnson was the first, and I forget who the second one was who produced. Welcome. Come right in. Um, and it used to be that these two new editions were the result of new scholarship, and it used to be that the editions of Emily Dickinson's poems were printed with the first line printed in dark bold as though it were the title. And then the poem with the first line repeated. Well, Emily Dickinson didn't give poems titles. So the new editions just number them. And there are two different systems of numbering, and I have not spent the time to figure out why Johnson did it one way. His book came out first, that's the one I own. There's another edition, and the numbers vary a bit. And I don't know why. I think they're essentially chronological, but I don't know that. But anyway, 564. And I'm keying off prayer that may begin with petition, but end somewhere else. My period had, I'm a terrible reader. I just want to confess that to you, but I take comfort because last summer, Betsy and I went to a Billy Collins reading, and he is the worst reader I have ever read. It was awful. And we're not awful. Yes, it's pretty awful.
So poetry is good.
What?
His poetry is good.
His poetry's great. So anyway, I don't feel quite as embarrassed about my reading as I did. My period had come for prayer. No other art would do. My tactics missed a rudiment. Creator, was it you? God grows above. So those who pray, horizons must ascend. So I stepped upon the north to see this curious friend. His house was not, no sign had he, by chimney, nor by door could I infer his residence. Vast prairies of air, unbroken by a settlement, were all that I could see. Infinitude. Hadst thou no face that I might look on thee? The silence condescended. Creation stopped for me. See, that's what stopped for me. But awed beyond my errand, I worshipped, did not pray. There's a lot going on here, but I think that's the experience. The speaker, we will, when we talk about poems, we may say Emily Dickinson says this and this and this, but remember that poems are art, a piece of art, they're constructions. And this may not be Emily Dickinson's own I'll go the other way around. You may not want to end up saying that this is exactly Emily Dickinson's point of view on a particular issue, but this is what the speaker, this little fictional speaker that she's created, is saying. So in this case, the speaker sets out to pray and experiences the absence of God and says, well, I'll go look for him. God is supposed to be up, so up she goes. You know, the reference to north, I sort of think you get to the top of the world, then you can see it all. You know, you're on the top. So up she goes, and there's nothing there. No house, no chimney, there are no settlers. It's just a prairie of air. Prairie is a big, big metaphor with Emily Dickinson about the vastness of the prairie. All there is vastness, infinitude. But there was no face that she could look at, nothing to look upon. The silence, it's interesting, I did not pick these poems because I saw interplay between them, but here's silence again, the same thing we found in Mary Oliver. Silence condescended. Condescended is a word which today may have to condescend simply means to come down. So silence came down. Condescend sometimes is used in a pejorative way, saying, well, don't be so condescending to me, don't patronize me. But that's not the sense I think is here. Create and stop. Well, that's I think there are several readings here. Creation might be, as I read through this, I thought, well, is our infinitude, silence, and creation names for God? I wonder if they are, because back here at the beginning, creator, was it you, who she was missing at the beginning? However, infinitude and silence and creation can just be infinitude, silence, or creation. I had a dear friend in Columbus who was retired professor of English at Ohio State. We were in a group together and we were reading T.S. Eliot's Journey of the Magi, and there's an image there where a white horse gallops across a field or something. And someone said, well, what's the white horse? Looking, well, he said the white horse could refer to one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. It could refer to Roman imperialism. It could just be a white horse. And so, infinitude and silence and creation could simply be what they say they are. Or they could be names for the Holy One. See, we're readers, we get to choose. And that's what's fun. Creation stopped for me. Well, that is so cruel. Did God stop? Is God paying attention and stopping? Or is she in an ecstasy? When you're in sort of an ecstatic mood, and we all have had them when we're just sort of outside of time. Creation stops at times like that. So, could be a white horse, could be God. Creation stopped for me, but this is a long way to get where I'm going with this. But far beyond my errand, you see, she started to pray. Awed beyond my errand, I worshiped, did not pray. So that leaves me, what's the distinction that Emily Dickinson is trying to put before us here? But that came to mind because we were suggesting that our prayer often begins in one place and ends up in another. And the expression, I came to scorn but stayed to pray. So much in life, we start to do something and end up being somewhere else and attending to something else. And the other thing, how much? Oh, we have a lot of time.
Yeah, we've got a clock up there that you can see.
Oh, we do. Oh, is that for the preacher so that
Don't want to reveal any secrets.
so we go till 10 maybe?
10:10, yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
okay. So I just think this is again, it's just a lovely poem that you know, I sometimes just get to the end of reading one of these poems and I say, how can one mind be so large to embrace all of that in, 10, 12, 14, 18 lines of poetry. I read this, and I'm doing exactly what I didn't want to do. I wanted everyone else to talk and not me. So I'm going to finish this and then be silent, but it'll take another 10 or 15 minutes to finish. This is exactly the same story as the book of Job, right? Now, Job storms the gates of God with a grievance. His life has been unjust. He knows that he's lived an honorable life, and by God, he is going to take God to trial. He wants to take God to a court. Never mind that God is the judge and the prosecuting attorney at the same time. And Job is his own defense attorney, but he's going to go take God on. And what happens is he finally gets there, and God says, okay, you're here, I'm here, give it to me, bring it on. And Job gives his complaint, and then God says, Job, were you there when the foundations of the world were laid down? Infinite, all of a sudden, God is infinitude. Job decided he had his little case. He was going to prosecute against God. And what he finds is something that is so vast and so huge that he's overwhelmed. Now, I have a friend, Bo Stevenson, who was a priest in Southern Ohio, ended up as a priest in the Church of England. And his reading of this story, Job's story, is that the presentation of God there is the presentation of a sternly omnipotent, unfeeling, just God who just obliterates anyone who comes up against him. And that Jesus, the incarnation, was the necessary remedy for that unfeeling God of sheer justice. But Jesus was the element of mercy. But I never, Bo and I would go at this with each other, because I read this entirely differently. I read that God was God. Obviously, he was all that he was in the story of Job. And all that he is here, infinitude, silence, creation, this vastness that's beyond imagination and description. But that the encounter that Job has with God humanizes Job. Job becomes fully human only at the point that he's willing and dares to take on God. So that venture for Job was finally the ultimate act that brings him into his full humanity. And in his full humanity, he discovers his true creatureliness. He now is in proper relationship with God and with all the rest of creation. And Emily Dickinson's journey is not as violent or as aggressive or as filled with grievance as Job's. It's a much quieter journey. But she still goes out to find this what's her word? This rudiment that was missing. Creator, was it you? And when she goes, she finds that, as Joe found, the agenda changed. She went to pray, but she didn't do it. She worshiped. So I noodled what's worship as distinct from prayer. Mhm. Well. I can't tolerate silence. It just so happens that the New York Times yesterday, can you believe it? It's just, no, I don't know. I get the Times online. I don't get it in paper. So sometimes things show up and they're not the exact date of publication. But yesterday, I was reading the Times and came upon an article which was entitled "How a Bit of Awe Can Improve Your Mental Health." I sort of, that's just like the Times, it's all sort of self-help and all that. But there were some interesting things. These are just, experiencing awe comes from what Dr. So-and-so has called a perceived vastness, as well as something that challenges us to rethink our previously held ideas. I just pulled out things that I thought were nifty. About a quarter, these are social scientists. Are there any sociologists too? Oh my gosh, I wouldn't say it then. There's nothing that for me can bring the mystery and wonder out of experience as quickly as a social scientist trying to understand and describe the nature of that experience, because the language, well, listen. About a quarter of all experiences are then, quote, flavored with feeling threatened. All through the Old Testament, the fear of the Lord, that suggested to me all of that. Sharon Salzberg, a leading mindfulness teacher and author, it has to do with paying attention. All she believes, and this is what was the key for me, all she believes is the absence of self-preoccupation. And so I began to noodle whether, prayer oftentimes, mine does anyway, start with petition and intercession and, my shopping list. Take to the infinite and say, I have coupons too. And oftentimes, maybe I would say, if we're lucky, the silence to that, the fact that the divine scanner doesn't read my coupons, may lead us to this point where it's no longer about me, but it's about infinitude. I'm 80 years old and I forget things. What were the words I just read that seem to say it so well? The absence of self-preoccupation. I think maybe that's a wonderful thing when it rarely happens to me in prayer. Because I'm pretty self-preoccupied. That may be where the transition from prayer to worship occurs, and worship is simply, I'm back to Mary Oliver, that's where I become aware of the silence, where another voice may speak. And well, that was a long way of saying that the Mary Oliver prayer led someone to say, I begin one place and end up in another. I think this Emily Dickinson prayer is a description of an experience of that.
Well, as I listen to you and I reread some of these things at the same time, a couple more last lines about this whole experience of looking for something, waiting for something, hoping for something, maybe not getting anything back, because from threshold, put my hand out into an unknown space, hoping for the reciprocating touch, or waiting evermore, forevermore behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I swear to you, I did not select these poems because they had that interweaving. That happened. I agree. Yeah, I think this threshold poem is absolutely spectacular. And
Yeah, I thought the bacteria destroying my cosmos was a little creepy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because again, it's sort of a corollary, and there are folks who want to talk, but it's sort of a corollary to, I want to look at the really beautiful bird. Wait a minute, there's this other thing over here that I just passed by. That really I should pay attention to. So the starling destroying my cosmos of bald eagles. That kind of thing. And I'm just going to say one other thing, and I'm going to be quiet. But you said you didn't sort of thematically look through these, but the interplay in almost all of them between this vastness on the one hand and this really teeny thing on the other hand just seems to show up over and over again. Just the words of billions or forming endless. Trillions and trillions. I mean, as opposed to the bacteria, this interplay of those two things show up over and over again. And I was sort of taken by that. I'm done.
I heard someone suck in a breath as though a word was about to come out. Did I hear that?
On the subject of awe, when you drive west on Rapid Road, you see Evans, you get this perfect perspective of it. It's almost like a logo or something. And I mean, it's vast, it's amazing, it's awe-inspiring, it's massive, it's snow-covered, 14,000 feet. And everything that points to it, it's kind of an interesting perspective. I went up there finally, and all the way up there, and loved it. And it's vast. You turn around from up there and face east, and you see the prairie stretching out, forever. It's still impressive, even there. So something about the accessibility of vastness in our day-to-day life. I mean, driving down Arapahoe Road, we can encounter the vastness.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for just mentioning. I was on my way to the drugstore and I was driving down the Arapahoe Road. And there it was. Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? And I tell you, as a guy, I was born in Ohio and I didn't leave it until 3 years ago. So I tell you, I look out my window and see those mountains every day and it's absolutely breathtaking. I mean, I have that, the potential for me to be awestruck just in a routine car trip is magnified for me because I spent 78 years unawestruck by mountains anyway, awestruck by a lot of other things maybe, but not by mountains. And it's, yeah.
You know, this kind of takes me back my senior year in high school. I was in an English class.
Speak up, Jim, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, in my senior year in high school, I was in an English class and we were doing readings. And being an engineer, I take things literally. But it was always amazing to me that hidden meanings or the meanings that people came out of these stories with. And they were in a different place than I was, you know, but I fascinating listening to the readings and the hidden words and how that impacts different people. I'm still an engineer.
Well, I'd like to respond. In one of Gary's sessions, I've only come to one of these sessions previously in person, but oftentimes catch them during the week by going to the webpage. And you were doing one of the, what did we call the last series? Uncomfortable.
Different books of the Bible.
Yeah. And you talked about the quadriga, you know, the traditional way of reading scripture, the literal, the allegorical, the moral, and the anagogical. In one sense, you can bring that same typology to a poem because you can say of the poem, well, what's the story? What are the words? And that, I think, when you say I'm an engineer, I think that's the primary point of entry into a text for someone whose temperament is what would you say? Numerical and quantifiable. I mean, that's where meaning is built. So that's the point of entry, you know. So what does it tell us? Well, you know, in the Emily Dickinson, it's a journey. You know, she looks for God, doesn't find him. All of a sudden, something happens to her. That's a pretty rich story, and someone else might tee off sort of the moral. And somewhere along the line this morning, I heard comments that sound like, well, in light of this, we ought to, you know, have our eyes open or behave this way or see the beauty in other people. So there's a kind of a moral reading, and then there's the allegorical reading. Well, you know, what does that stand for? Maybe well, you know, the bacteria, you know, boy, that's the difference between a starling and a whatever, you know, bald eagle or whatever the beautiful bird is, and the anaconda, what's my hope? So there are different points of entry for every one of us, I think, and one's not better than the other. Betsy and I both hated high school English because the teacher was always talking about the deep inner meaning, which we call the dim in our household. And none of us, neither of us got it, you know, we didn't.
That's what Jim's talking about too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to look at the dim.
Yeah,
And maybe it was just a white horse, you know?
exactly.
I think it would be outraged in my sophomore English class when the idea of symbolism was introduced. What is the deep meaning
Yeah.
the red stuff. The sun is setting. Yeah, it's red, it's going down. Point, yeah, done.
And that's good enough. I mean, well, it's not only good enough, I mean, it is precisely what it is.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
That's exactly what the Horace Benson says, it could just be a white horse. And, right. Well, I think our time is drawing to a close. I just want to say, of two other poems, I guess we've really touched them all except the George Herbert and the Walt Whitman, although Gary mentioned the Walt Whitman a bit. I just want Walt Whitman, you just sort of want to know what he was smoking. I mean, this
He's supposed to leave some grass.
It's better.
I mean, and all of his poetry is like this. It's just so exuberant. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. And George Herbert, I love. I did this one on prayer. I just have the sense in this one that he just throws stuff at the wall, and whatever sticks, sticks. So, you just read through this. What is prayer? Well, it's the church's banquet, it's the angel's age, it's God's breath returning to his birth, it's the soul in paraphrase. It's hard, my gosh, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 3 lines in, we've got 6 metaphors already. And it goes on and on and on and on, And I'm saying, well, if I'm looking for a doctrinal theology, I'm out of luck. But if there may be one metaphor in there that just nails me, and for me, that's enough in a poem. So there are so many different ways of writing a poem, and so many different ways of reading a poem. And the poem isn't complete until it has a reader. So we have our part that we have to bring to the enterprise, and every reading is a legitimate reading. I'm done. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, Betsy says I have to do next week's, yeah. Yeah, we'll pass these out, but then I'll leave them on the table here. So do them around here. And then we'll just leave the extras. That's the best place, just
Yeah,
on
we'll
this
just leave
table.
them on the table out
Yeah,
in front of you.
well,
Great, thank you.
well, thank you very much. I must say, most of the ones of these forums I've looked in on the video have been more in a lecture format, and I was a little bit anxious about whether people would feel comfortable being in conversation, and I'm delighted. I look forward to next week. Just read the poems and spend some time with them and come loaded for bear.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Do you need us to put the chairs back?
No. It'll happen. The gremlins will be.